Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night Whisky Exchange tasting. Tonight, we are going to be looking at whisky from, as my colleague Gareth has described it, the Islay powerhouse of Bunnahabhain. So, my name is Billy Abbott. I'm the Whisky Exchange's ambassador, and I'm a big fan of whisky from Bunnahabhain. So, they've asked me to talk to... Sorry, myself. I just suddenly appeared on screen and started talking against myself. Ignore me. So, yeah, so we're going to talk about Bunnahabhain and try some whiskey. So if you want to pour yourself a whiskey to start with, so we can have something to drink while we're thinking about it, we're going to start off tonight with Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. This might be a slightly different order to the order you have in your tasting packs, but we're going to kick off tonight with Bunnahabhain 12. So, anyways, yeah, so Bunnahabhain, I've got a lovely presentation which looks a lot nicer than me, so I'm going to pop that up for you now. So, Burnhaven Distillery. There we go. Burnhaven Distillery is on the island of Islay. So Islay is an island famed in Scotland for producing lots and lots of great and very famous whiskies. So it is off the west coast of Scotland, and the thing it's mainly famous for is for making very peaty whiskies. And Bunnahabhain is very different to a lot of the other distilleries because it doesn't go down that path for the most part. Most of Bunnahabhain's whiskies are unpeated. And so this first whiskey we have here, I'll talk a little bit about it in a second. This is Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. And it is very much the flagship of Bunnahabhain and really shows you what they're about, what sort of whiskey they're trying to make. So while I'm talking about it, I just want to sort of give you something to sip on so you can put up with my voice for a little bit longer before we move on to more fun facts. So yeah, Bunnahabhain itself, it was founded in 1881. It's been around for quite a long time on Islay. But it's had a bit of a sort of checkered history. It's been up, it's been down, it's been open, it's been closed. And it's also changed a lot over time with its style. Even over sort of more recent history, the style of whiskey they've been making has been changing. And they're a distillery who's well known for being a little bit different, being a little bit weird, and with quite a lot of different sort of styles that you can find of their whiskey out there. But we're going to focus on the whiskies made by, released by the distillery themselves, which really sort of focus in on the style that they want to talk about, their style of Bunnahabhain they really want to make a big splash about. So, as I said, Bunnahabhain itself, this is the island of Islay. So if you know Scotland, you have the big bit of Scotland, and off on the west coast you have the Mull of Kintyre, and off the west of the Mull of Kintyre, eventually you go across the sea for about a couple of hours on a ferry, and you'll hit the island of Islay. And there's lots of distilleries in Islay you would have heard of before. Down the bottom here, we have Ardbeg, Lagavulin, and Lefroy. You've got Port Ellen, famed closed distillery. You've got Bowmore, Broccoli, Kilchoman, Killeela up on the northeast, and then the most northerly distillery on Bunnahabhain is now also Ardnahoe between Killeela and Bunnahabhain on the road between the two. But you follow the road all the way to the end, and you get to Bunnahabhain. And one of Bunnahabhain's things I like to say is it's a journey worth taking. It's a very windy road. It's quite difficult to get down. If it's raining, it's horrible. But if it's sunny, it's absolutely beautiful. And it takes you along the coast as you sort of wind down to Bunnahabhain itself. So they opened in 1881. They started producing whiskey in 1885. And over the years, I said, open and close, there's been wars and shortages and whiskey lochs and lacks of whiskey and all that sort of thing. More recent history, though, it's closed between 1982 and 1984. And then new owners took over in 2003 and sort of started up properly again. Between 1999 and 2003, it's a little bit quiet, limited production. So they have these gaps in production. So when you're looking back over time at older whiskies, they don't have a complete lineup of whiskey from every single year. So they have sort of different eras and different ages. And as we try through the range, we'll see those different sort of ages and eras and how they're sort of expressed in flavour. These days, Bunnahabhain is part of the same family of distilleries as Deanston and Tobermory. Also, the James Sedgwick Distillery down in South Africa. They're all owned by a company called Distell. They're well known for making a wide range of really quite great whiskies. While I was sort of saying they're really well known for unpeated whiskey, keep an eye on the last whiskey on our set, because the last one is a peated whiskey, because over the past few years they've become really well known for making some really great smoky whiskies as well. But the thing which has really made their name is the unpeated whiskies, the whiskies they sort of start, more recently have been known for. So here we go. This is Burnhaven Distillery itself. It's right down by the sea, and as I say, it's end of the road. You literally have to drive past the distillery, then drive back down the road to come back down to it. It has a pier, which is no longer, unfortunately, used to deliver barley and ship out whiskey. It's mainly used by tourists coming to visit these days. But the distillery really is right down on the seafront, and you can go and play on the beach if you visit. And on the visiting front, they're doing a massive refurb at the moment, rebuilding visitor centre, making it so that it's even more worthwhile to take the trip there. It's a little bit of a windy road. It's a little bit out of the way, even when you're on Islay, which itself is out of the way. So they try and make it so it's really, really worthwhile visiting, which it pretty much is already. So back to, is it gone? Boom, boom. Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. So this is very much the distillery's flagship, and this is the reason why I want to start with it tonight. About 10 years ago, back in 2010, this is the whiskey that was best known, but didn't really look like this at the time. It had a green bottle, and I had a bottle knocking around at home, which I found on top of a radiator when I moved into a new flat. And it was a little bit flat, a little bit lifeless, still nice-ish whiskey, but not particularly interesting. And in 2010, the distillery decided it was going to relaunch the whiskey, revamp their entire range, and focus it more towards the whiskey connoisseur, the whiskey geeks like me. And so what they did was they decided to up the ABV. So it was originally, I think it was 40 or 43%, and they pushed it up to 46.3% to try and make sure it's got a load more oomph. And on top of that, they also decided to stop using colouring in it. So it's now entirely natural colour, and it's non-chill filtered. So chill filtering is when you cool down your whiskey and pass it through a filter to try and remove some compounds in the whiskey that might go cloudy if you add water or add ice cubes to it. And while generally, you can manage it pretty well, it doesn't hurt your whiskey too much, it will remove something from the whiskey, and consequently, a lot of people don't want that to happen. So Bunnahabhain said, no chill filtering, more of a focus on the whiskey connoisseur, the people who understand that and people who don't really mind if it goes a little bit cloudy. The other big thing, though, is there's natural colour. So every single bottle, there might be a little bit of a difference between different colours of the whiskey in the bottle. That's because it's all natural. All the colour comes from the cask. So Bunnahabhain 12-year-old has been around for ages. It's been the whiskey that people have really known the distillery for. It's launched in 1979 and has been around ever since, as I say, changing about 10 years ago to sort of become its current form. It is double matured, by which they mean, some people may say double matured, it's like matured in one thing, then another thing. I had a chat with them just to make sure. And so this is a combination of whiskey matured in bourbon casks and whiskey matured in sherry casks. And it's that combination of both of them which gives the whiskey its sort of distinctive character, along with the fact that Bunnahabhain itself has this slightly sort of maritime air. It's down by the seafront, and while some people claim that definitely adds a sort of seaside air to it, I'm not quite so convinced. Almost the entirety of Scotland is, in the grand scheme of things, by the sea. So I'm not entirely sure whether being on the seafront itself adds any sort of saltiness or sort of seaside brininess to your whiskey. It's generally something that romantically does seem to fit. So anyway, we should probably have a bit of a taste of this. So let's have a quick look and see if there's people still there. Yes, there are still people in the room who are drinking. Excellent, I see people drinking. That's even better. So, excuse me, have a bit of a nose and a bit of a taste. I used to be a massive fan of Bunnahabhain, but over the past few years, I've not really tried loads of their whiskey. So really excited to do this tasting so I could dive back into the range and see how things have changed over the years. And for the 12, it really hasn't. Since it relaunched 10 years ago, it's been this very much this style of whiskey with a bit of seaside in there, a nice big rich character to it. So on the nose, I get loads of sort of fruitiness, sort of sherry cask fruit, bit of nuts, bit of oiliness. I always get this. It's not quite engine oil. It's a little bit dirtiness in a Bunnahabhain. I always find, in a good way, a little bit of muckiness, and a hint of brine in there as well. But really big sort of sherry cask back end to it. This raisiny sort of character you get from sherry casks really shines through in Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. So on the palate, again, that sherry cask character really is the thing that jumps out to me first. Lovely sort of raisin notes. Yeah, definitely sort of pretty much as it says on the tin. They're going for this idea of slightly maritime but big, rich whiskies. And Bunnahabhain's whiskies, in the main, have always been big, rich and oily whiskies. They have very tall stills, and so respect a sort of lighter style of whiskey potentially, but just the way they run it, the way they mature, the way they select their casks, means they do get this nice, big, rich style of whiskey coming out at the end when they finally bottle it. So, thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, Andrew in the Zoo Room says it's creamy dram which unfolds as the heat dissipates. So definitely a little bit of warmth to it. The 46.3%, it jacks up the alcohol, intensifies the flavour, but it does have a little bit of extra heat. And it can take a little drop of water as well. Some sherry cask whiskies totally fall to pieces if you add water to them. This one, just add a couple of drops, softens it out a little bit, and opens it up. So, excellent. Ooh, so just trying to see if anybody's talking to us on Facebook today. Anyway, yes. So, does anybody in the Zoom room have any questions about anything so far? If you do, please just drop them into the chat, comments, questions, whatever. Raise your hand on the thing. And the same, anybody out on Facebook, if you have anything you'd like to ask, please drop into the comments. So, oops. Give me a if you do, shush, just drop go away. Shush. There we go. I don't want to hear myself talking when I'm talking. That'd be awful. So, should we move on to the next whiskey? Yes, I shall talk a little bit more about Bunnahabhain. So, as I said before, Bunnahabhain right down on the coast. And one of the things about Bunna is it's always had this sort of maritime connection. And that even goes down to their logo, their label. They've always had maritime sort of themes, including, I'll move on to show you the label of the next whiskey so you can see what I'm talking about. The logo itself here, it has the helmsman. And this whiskey, Rudder, they have a habit at the moment of coming up with names for their whiskies which are almost unpronounceable when you read the Gaelic. I've checked on this one. This is Rudder, which is the Gaelic word for helmsman. And so their bottle very much features this guy. Every single one of their bottles is all about their connections to the sea. Because Islay was very isolated until fairly recently. And so it was the distilleries which had peers who could get barley in, who could get whiskey out. And Bunnahabhain, right up in the northeast, really sort of quite isolated. It's on the Sound of Islay. And the Sound of Islay is a very, very fast-moving body of water. And consequently, it's quite difficult to navigate. So to get your whiskey out, your barley in, you take some actual serious work. And so there's lots of sort of sailors and boats involved in getting to and from the distillery. And so they always like to celebrate that connection. The Sound of Islay itself is quite impressive. There's lots of deer on Jura, which is the next island over. And if a deer sort of jumps into the sea, at the top of Jura, by the time they've crossed over to get over towards Islay, they've gone straight past Islay and they're out to sea again. If you ever had a chance to get on the Jura ferry, and if you've not been to Islay, I thoroughly recommend it. But the Jura ferry, you jump on it from Islay, and sometimes you'll end up sort of going due north, away from almost like only slightly towards Jura, but the current's strong enough that you literally have to just go straight against the current, and you slowly but surely just drift across to Jura. It's very relaxing. If slightly worrying, is it takes significantly longer. You can almost throw a ball from Islay to Jura. So yeah, to take 20 minutes on a ferry because the current's so strong is always a bit weird. Oh yes, so Bunnahabhain. Moving on to our second dram of the day. So this is Stew Rudder. It is a newer addition to the Bunnahabhain range. Over time, normally, Bunnahabhain stuck around their 12 and their 18, 25 and older whiskies. But in more recent times, they've brought out lots of different whiskies, all with weird Gaelic names, all exploring different sides of what they have within the distillery itself. So Stew Rudder is all about sherry casks. Burnhaven's already fairly well known for making really good sherried whiskey, but sorry, there we go, that's Stew Rudder. Hopefully you can see that. It's our second whiskey. Lots of sherry casks, but this is one which is really leaning into that and trying to explore what that really means for Bunnahabhain itself. So it is matured in a mixture of first and refill sherry casks. So it's all about the sherry. They don't give an age statement on it. I managed to grab a little sort of data sheet, sort of giving all the hidden secrets of what all the whiskies were, and it didn't even tell me what the ages were on that. So unfortunately, I don't know how old it is. But it's all about first fill, so big sherry casks that have not been used for whiskey before, so giving an immediate big kick of sherry cask flavour. But it's also refill sherry. So these are casks that have been used for Scotch whiskey before. And so while they still have that sort of rich sherry cask character, it won't have quite so much of it as the first fill ones. And this means that it's not a bad thing. Some of my favourite whiskies come from refill casks. Most of my favourite whiskies come from refill casks because there's some subtlety there. The whiskey itself will mature over time, so the whiskey changes not only from pulling flavour out of the wood, but just it develops on its own as well. And there we go. The first fills will have that big kick of flavour. The refills will just allow a more subtle and more sort of refined sort of like addition of flavour over time. And so this combines that big kick of sherry with that longer maturation, with that sort of more subtle maturation, which allows the flavour of the spirit itself to come through. So it's not just about the big casks, it's a combination of the cask and the spirit. So, and again, it's called Stew Rudder. This is all about the helmsman, all about their sort of heritage, of seaside heritage, their sort of marine heritage. Is that what I'm thinking of? Anyway, the fact they have this connection to the sea, and on the nose, immediately you can definitely get some of that sort of like seaside thing. Andrew's just popped up and said that it's very pungent. Yes, very much so. With furniture polish, raw meat. I'm not getting so much of the raw meat side of things, but I know what you mean about that furniture polish. I'm definitely getting some sort of sherry cask, sort of fruitiness and sugary sort of notes in there as well. But there is definitely this briny coastal note in there. And this is one of the things actually to point out when it comes to flavours in whiskey. There is no salt in whiskey. There is no brine in whiskey. When we talk about a briny whiskey, we're not talking about the fact there's actually brine in here. There's actually salt in here. But the way that the way that flavour works, the way that your mind interprets flavours, is that you smell things and your brain latches onto something that's similar to it, something that the flavour in the whiskey reminds it of. Sometimes that might be the actual thing. If you sniff an apple, you'll probably go, "Oh, that smells like apples." Other times you'll smell a whiskey and go, "Oh, that smells like apples." There will be almost certainly no common actual compounds between what you're smelling and an apple, but it just tweaks the same part of the brain. And when it comes to brine and saltiness, it's very much the same thing. It's other smells, other chemicals, which might be something that you'd associate with it, or something that happens at the same time as you smell something briny. It could be something totally different that just triggers a memory that makes you think of the sea. So there's no salt, there's no brine in this at all. It just reminds you of it. I love the fact that brains are weird and that brains do really cool things with flavours. So I have a question, I do believe from Facebook, my friend David has passed on to me. Is there anything in the shape of the bottle? I don't think so, actually. It's a very, very sort of utilitarian bottle. It reminds me some of the sort of the rum bottles we've sort of seen back in the in previous centuries. It's all about the sea and trying to evoke that sort of like maritime connection, hence the ropes on the side of the bottle. And I think probably that's the most likely reason why they've chosen this shape. It's all about sort of utilitarian bottles that you would see on ships back in the day. So anyway, does anybody have any comments about this whiskey in the Zoom room? So Andrew's already given me some tasting notes. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to mention? So if not, I'll just jump straight into tasting it. So on the nose, really has that oiliness. Bunnahabhain, I describe it sometimes as like engine oil, like, you know, warm engines and things like that. And it varies between the different expressions, quite how much of it there is. But in this one, there's a little bit of it, that sort of like, you know, slightly dirty engine oil thing, along with that brininess and some sort of apples and sort of stewed apple and things like that. It's quite a lot of stuff going on in the nose, but all the way through that sort of sugary, brown sugary, raisiny sherry cask. On the palate, sherry's there, but it's not so big as in the 12-year-old. The Rudder is almost certainly a little bit younger, and trying to emphasize that maritime flavor as well. So it's not really focusing on the intense sherry and the richer, rounder sherry you get in the 12-year-old. It's just bringing that in and balancing it against that maritime briny character. So I'm definitely getting that brine, getting a little bit of nice sort of dried fruit to it. And again, a little bit of that engine oil. I'm a big fan of that engine oily sort of character. So a lot of time for that. So yes, so very much sort of trying to do that connection to the sea, down to the branding of always having the helmsman on every single bottle. And if you've ever been to Burnhaven, it really is out the way. It really is down by the sea. Years ago, I visited Islay, and I've been up and down the Sound of Islay. And as you come back down, having gone right up to the sort of the north of the island, come back down again, the distillery sort of pops up on the seashore, and it really is, you know, it's almost from nowhere. Yeah, up in that sort of like northern corner of the island, there is only the one road. If you want to get in and out, it used to always be very much by sea. So, shall we have a look around? Yes, so casks. So, talking before about how Bunnahabhain's well known for doing these rich, sort of sherried whiskies. They do have a nice big range of different types of cask in their warehouse, going from the bourbon casks all the way through to big sherry casks. But they also do lots of experiments with other different types of cask. They keep those really for special editions, and that's another reason why it's really good to visit the island, because their shop is always full of weird and wonderful things you can't find elsewhere. But sherry casks are really Bunnahabhain's bread and butter. It's the thing which they're really well known for, and it is the style of whiskey which they really do very, very well. It's that weightiness of their spirit which allies well with the casks. However, there's a definite difference when it comes to the styles of Bunnahabhain between the younger ones and the older ones. So far we've tried the 12-year-old, which is, you know, the flagship, been there forever, and it's really what we're doing as our standard whiskey today. But the Rudder, which is all about sherry, but also trying to emphasize that maritime component. And so that's very much that sort of style of those younger whiskies. It's all about the sea and the cask. But when you get onto older whiskies, the style of whiskey itself, the character of the whiskey changes. And if you're very lucky enough to try their really old whiskies, they have, you find independent bottlings in the 30s and 40s. They have their own 40-year-old whiskey, which I have a little sample of knocking around here somewhere for me to try later on. We recently ran a competition with the prize being a bottle of this 40-year-old whiskey. And if you can find those, they're absolutely amazing. They're very, very different to these younger ones. But you can start approaching that with the upper end of their range. So diving into our next whiskey, which is the Bunnahabhain 18-year-old. So stop my presentation for a moment, see how everybody's doing. So we have the Bunnahabhain 18 is our next little sample. So this is a whiskey which I have a lot of fondness for. While the 12-year-old may be the one where I started, I as I said, literally, I moved into a flat in the early 2000s, and I found a bottle on top of a radiator when I moved in. I have no idea how long it had been there. I was just sort of newly sort of minted whiskey geek, and I sort of sought out more. And the 18 was really the whiskey which sort of made me realise I really quite like some Bunnahabhains. So there we go. Right, what have I got here? So Bunnahabhain, 18-year-old. Where are you, Zoom? Here we go. Burnhaven 18. Here's what it looks like. It goes with blue as its colour. So the Bunnahabhain 18 is continuing the ideas of the Rudder, really, at the same time as going for this longer aged approach. This one is aged entirely in first fill Oloroso sherry casks. So we said about the Rudder, it has that combination of the first fill casks, which give that big punch of sherry, and the refill casks, which give you sort of more subtle sherry tones. This one is all about that big punch of sherry, but the whiskey's also been in the cask for 18 years. So it's got a long time to sort of pick up those flavours. And after a while, you start picking up the really intense sherry flavours, and it mellows and pulls out those more complex flavours as well. So it's just longer aging in a first fill cask will give you that intensity, but it will also give you extra complexity and a very different idea around the concept of sherry casks when it comes to Bunnahabhain spirit. And again, weighty spirit, big punchy casks, all comes together. Well, Keith and Elizabeth in our Zoom room have popped up as saying beautiful, a woody finish. And that's one of the things you're definitely going to notice is there's definitely some wood on this. It's been 18 years in a cask that had just had sherry in it before. So really loads of flavour in the wood still, hasn't been sort of drawn out by other maturations. So it's going to have a load of that woodiness. But also over time, that woodiness will be pulled into the whiskey, and the extra time in the cask will just allow that to mellow in the spirit. You know, one of the common misconceptions about casks is that they give loads and loads and loads of flavour. And I was speaking to somebody about this recently. And you know, they don't like the fact that people talk about casks giving 60% of the flavour of a whiskey comes from the cask. As Mark Rainier from Burnhaven Distillery in Ireland. And he said, no, it's not 60% of the flavour. The cask affects 100% of the whiskey. It's not just it adds flavour in one chunk. It affects the whole of the whiskey, and every step of the process when making a whiskey will create that sort of final flavour. So here, it's not just adding a massive chunk of flavour, it's allowing the flavours to change in a certain way to create this final product, including allowing the flavours to develop in the cask, not only from pulling out the wood, but just over time itself. I have a bit of an obsession with casks and what they can do to whiskey, especially when they're not doing anything to the whiskey apart from just holding the whiskey. And that's where you get some of the most incredible transformations over time. So we moved up to 18 years, so an extra 6 years on top of our 12-year-old, probably 10 years on top of the Stu Rudder, creating this big, rich, sherried whiskey. So on the nose, it's more refined, I think. The Stu Rudder and the 12 have that big punch of sort of sherry immediately. This has got that sherry, but it's got a little bit like wood polish in there as well, some polished oak, old wood. I'm just saying, woody finish, I can smell the wood already on this, but it's not that sharp, sort of sawdusty wood. It's all about that sort of nice, polished old wood. And on the palate, definitely some oak in there. But it's very, again, it's refined, it's not sawdusty, it's not splintery. It's just good, solid, spicy wood, polished oak. And that sherry cask, rather than being a big punch like it is in some of the other whiskies, it's this soft sort of like layers of fruit just hanging around there in the background. So back to the casks. So Bunnahabhain doesn't mature all of its whiskey on the island. It has a lot of space on the island for it. Little bits and pieces go off elsewhere onto the mainland, but a lot of the whiskey they have is matured on the island. And this is all part of the heritage more than it is the flavours it creates. But wherever you mature your whiskey in Scotland, you're going to get potential influence of the sea. And so they have all these big casks in the all along the coast, pulling up all these different flavors. And the focus on the sherry cask is really quite important because it helps them define this style, which is all based on sherry in different ways. So, question from Keith and Elizabeth. I don't know whether it's Keith or Elizabeth asking, or I can't even see you if you're on the thing at the moment, so I can't see if it's both of you there. Anyway, hello. If this whiskey is unpeated but smoky, you're guessing that's from the cask or the wood. Well, this is a bit of a strange one. There's no smoke in this. It's not smoky in a traditional smoky way when it comes to whiskey. It probably won't be the cask or the wood even. You know, the wood will be adding some woody flavors, but it will be just the development over time. So pull some woody flavors out. It will, those woody flavors might trigger sort of smoky sort of reminiscences in your brain. And so it could be from the cask, it could be from the spirit itself. As the spirit changes over time, as the flavors develop in the spirit, it will change and create those smoky flavors. So you just said you mean in general? Yeah, in general, wood doesn't add a smokiness. There's also this talk often about how the fact that the inside of casks are normally charred, and you char the inside of a cask before you fill it with whiskey to act as a filter rather than as a flavouring agent. So it's a bit like a Brita water filter. The way that a cask works is as it gets warmer and colder as the seasons change, pores in the wood open up and it sucks whiskey in. And then when it gets cold again, the pores close up and it pushes the whiskey out. If you have a layer of char on the inside of the cask, it is very much like a water filter. The whiskey passes through the char layer, and then when it's pushed out again, passes through the char layer again. And that strips out basically off flavors in the whiskey. And so you don't get a char flavor, you don't get a smoky flavor. Apart from, say, maybe from the wood, some of the flavors pulled out of the wood might develop into smokiness. But it's just one of those things of flavors develop in a cask from lots of different sources. And you may not know the exact source of the specific compound which is being created, as it could be from everything. But so there's no smoke in this at all. Generally, we talk about smoky whiskey, we talk about peat. And the way that you add the smoke to the barley is that you dry your barley when you're malting by burning peat. Traditionally, this was the only fuel they had on places like Islay, so they needed to use peat. But over time, we now have machines that will just make hot air. You don't need to dry your barley using peat anymore. So, as such, it's a choice. And the barley that they use for Bunnahabhain is entirely unpeated as much as they can make it unpeated. I think this has got about 2 parts per million of phenols, which is the standard measure when we're talking about how smoky things are. So when we talk about this being 2 ppm, people say, oh, so that must be where the smoke comes from. 2 ppm is just what's present in the barley anyway. There's no smoke in this barley whatsoever. But it's incredible how much those smoky flavors can just come from maturation. Just triggers memories and out they pop. So, moving on from, sorry, quick check of my notes. Yeah. So 18 years in a first fill Oloroso sherry cask gives us quite a big sort of whack of that woody flavour. There's still lots of flavour left in the wood because it's had nothing else in there beforehand but sherry, and it's got that sherry flavour in there as well. So it pulls out the sherry and pulls out the woody notes, and that's really what drives the flavour of the whiskey in the 18-year-old, along with that sort of briny spirit that they have in there in the first place. A comment from Andrew here. Woodwork classroom smells, including the oil on the lathes, if you add a bit of water. And that's, I think, that slight dirtiness, that lathe oil sounds about right for it. Question from Gail I have here in the room. Do the distillery use single casks to fill... Oh yes, the single cask for the 18-year-old is in multiple casks. So all of the whiskies we're trying today, these are vattings of multiple casks of whiskey. For pretty much every regular release of whiskey you're going to get out there, it's a vatting of more than one cask. It's really difficult to get a consistent whiskey from cask to cask to cask, and things like the 12, the 18, 25 and all the ones you're going to try today, they want to make it so that next time you buy a bottle of it, it tastes the same as it did last time, or at least really, really close. And the difference from cask to cask is often so much that you can't guarantee that with single cask whiskies. And that's the reason why people love single casks. A single cask whiskey is just like a thing which, you know, people haven't played with it. It's just literally what it is. And so they will vary, and you'll get like incredible peaks of those. And so some of them can be incredibly good, some of them not quite so good. But it's when you combine those together, you get that consistency that is something like the 12, the 18. So the 18-year-old, this is definitely a vatting of multiple casks. So, and they'll get some of them which have got lots more sherry influence, some of them with less sherry influence, and they'll mix those together to get this balanced flavour, which is the profile they want, which is going to be the same almost every single time. Well, as close as they can get it to the same every single time. Right, go back to lovely presentation again. So, come on, there we go. So, casks. These are sherry casks anyway. These casks sitting in here, they're a little bit bigger than other ones. So other casks you'll find in there, American standard barrels, around 200 litres. Hogsheads, about 230, some bit bigger. Sherry butts are about 500 litres. They're really big, and they're really noticeable. The shape of them, I can look down this row and see there's some sherry butts in here just because they have this big round bulbous shape. Sherry butts are very much the peak of casks at the moment in Scotland. Everybody wants sherry butts and wants to use sherry casks to make their whiskies. But it's not just about, as I was saying, about these first fill. The first time you use a cask in Scotland, it's called the first fill. So you used to have bourbon in beforehand, and then you use it for whiskey, Scotch whiskey. It's a first fill bourbon cask. If it had sherry in it, and now you filled it with Scotch whiskey, it's a first fill sherry butt. If you then fill it with whiskey again, it's a second fill. That's what we mean by the multiple numbers. And casks can be used 5, 6, 7, however many times you want. Generally, after about 3 or 4, they stop giving quite so much woody flavour, and it's generally not used in sort of big punchy single malts so much. But the more you use a cask, the more you let maturation happen without the influence of the wood. And it's getting that balance is very important. So we want to move on to our next whiskey. We are going to try the Bunnahabhain 25-year-old. Oh, come on, focus. There we go. 25-year-old. So this is of the regularly available ongoing Bunnahabhain range. This is the top of the range. And it looks like this. So, a question from Andrew about sherry for a moment. What is the difference between Oloroso and Methuselah? I think what you mean is Oloroso and Methuselah. Methuselah is a sherry made by González Bias. It's a specific bodega sherry rather than Oloroso, which is a type of sherry in general. There's loads of different types of sherry, varying from Fino, which is the crisp, dry, sort of eat with some cheese and ham sort of sherry, all the way up to PX, which is the really sticky, pour it over ice cream, taste of raisins sherry. Everything starts off as Fino, and over time there are different processes that take, almost everything starts off as Fino, and different processes which allow it to oxidize or not oxidize. They are sweetened or not sweetened. And Oloroso is, you take Fino, which is aged with a massive yeast on top so that no air gets to it, so it stays light in color. Oloroso is without that, so that after it's becoming Fino and it's aged, it then oxidizes, it goes dark in color and picks up these darker, nuttier flavors. Sometimes Oloroso is sweetened with PX wine to make it a medium Oloroso or a sweet Oloroso, like something like Harvey's Bristol Cream. So there's lots of different grades of sort of like dryness and sweetness. But Oloroso is the standard sherry used in whiskey casks, because it has this balance of rich, dark sherry flavors and nuttiness, and also without too much sugary flavor in there as well most of the time, which means you get a very balanced sherry influence on your whiskey. So we're moving here onto the the Bunnahabhain 25-year-old, which I still have not poured for myself, I don't think. No, there we go. Should pour some of that. So this is, as I say, the top end of the regular releases we get from Bunnahabhain. It's Oloroso casks again. This is a mix of first fill and refill Oloroso. So this is looking back again to the Rudder approach of trying to get that combination of both upfront, big, punchy hit of Oloroso sherry from the first fill casks. So that 18-year-old sort of style, big, sort of like rich. But it also adds in these refill ones so that you get more spirit maturation and a lighter influence. And that combination gives you a much wider array of flavors to play with and allows you to sort of add more complexity to your whiskey. But again, as we found with the 18-year-old, rather than that big punch of first fill sherry that you'd expect from a younger whiskey, it's mellowed out over time. And with a refill cask, as you leave it for longer, you'll pull out more of those flavors, as well as allowing the spirit to become more mature. The spirit, when it matures on its own, it changes its flavor. There are reactions that happen just in the spirit itself, which change what it tastes like, create compounds, removes compounds, and also over time, the spirit evaporates. And so as it evaporates out of the cask, it concentrates the remaining stuff that's in the cask, and so it gives you more intense flavors and changes the balance of flavors as whiskies get older. So 25-year-old, a whiskey that I very rarely get a chance to try. I'm very pleased to have a go at today. But yeah, very much so. It has that sherry cask in there, but it's quite fruity. It's got some apples and sort of orchard fruit in there. Some more sort of sultanas and things before it gets onto that big sugary raisiny sort of note in there as well. It's got some polished oak. It's got that sort of more elegant side of sherry cask, but it still has that nice big punch of dried fruit, sort of going towards fruitcake. On the palate, it's got that sort of soft, fruity caramel thing up front, but nice spiciness at the back, and a richness all the way through the palate. It may not look, where's it gone? I've lost it again. Oh, here it is. It may not have the darkest of colours. If you actually look at the label, look at the actual liquid in the bottle, it's not too dark, but it really tastes rich, dark and spicy. Doesn't quite go into that dark fruitcake side of things, but it's got nuts. Definitely, Clifford's popped up and said it's very sweet. Definitely has a load of sweetness in there as well. And I think that must be from those first fill casks. It's been in there for a long time, pulled out that sweetness. And when they've chosen the cask to batch together to make the 25-year-old, they've gone for those sweeter ones to make sure we bring out that extra sweetness on the palate. But on top of all of that, it has still, talking about that sort of oily, engine oily sort of character I find in Burnhaven. It's got a bit of sort of like a leafiness and grassiness, sort of like not quite seaweedy, but for me it's like damp forest floors and damp forests after rain. I always get that sort of leafy sort of like character, especially on the palate. Sort of damp wood, damp leaves. It's yeah, toffee and caramel, and a little bit of that in there as well. Oh, comment of creamy, but a bit of blue cheese potentially. I can see what you mean. That sort of goes along with my sort of forest flory type thing. That sort of slightly sort of savoury and let's say savouriness, brininess. Throw in some leaves, you start moving definitely towards a blue cheese. Unfortunately, I'm not a blue cheese fan. I feel bad, and I feel I'm not a good person because of it. I'm working on it. One day I'll like blue cheese. So I see a nod. Thank you. I'm working on it. So, oh, can I put the picture back up again? Certainly. Somebody preferring a picture of whiskey rather than my face. I'm not insulted. There we go. So yes, this is the 25-year-old. This is their sort of outside of the 40-year-old. This sort of occasionally produced in small batches, quite difficult to get hold of. We have a little bit at the Whisky Exchange, but they also do batches for the distillery itself. really sort of high-end sort of whiskey. This is their standard one, which is the top end of their range you can get hold of. Ooh, got a couple of questions. So from Facebook. So do they char sherry butts? Not before. When you make a cask, there is some toasting of the wood. Basically, you heat the wood so you can bend it into the shape of a cask. Casks don't have glue or anything like that. It's all about heating the wood and then bending it and adding the hoops to hold it into place. So during that process, you definitely toast the inside of the cask. If you've ever been to a bodega in Jerez, we're actually making casks, there's fire everywhere. They love fire. So there's some toasting, but it's just quite the point when you go from toasting into charring. So there will be some heating of the wood, which activates the wood not only for this filtering, but also makes flavors in the wood more available. If you heat stuff up, it becomes more chemically active. So heating the wood allows that to happen. So you're not going to get a really deep and dark char in a sherry cask. In America, they talk about the different levels of char, and the top level is alligator. So the inside of the char looks like an alligator's skin. So that level of char, you're not going to get that on a sherry cask, but it'll be toasted. There'll be some sort of activation of the compounds in the wood before you put your sherry in there. But yeah, there will be some charring of some kind, but not a lot. My favourite tasting note of the day there from Andrew in the Zoom room: distant banana revealed by water. I do apologise if you see that in the tasting note that I write sometime soon. I do like it enough to potentially thieve it. Credit given here. So thank you, Andrew. So what do people think of this? Anybody? I stop showing. Sorry to show my face again, but it means I can actually see what people are saying. Any comments on this? Anybody like this? Anybody not like it? I see some nods. I see some thumbs up, some waving. That's all good. Like it. Excellent. So it is a whiskey which, like I say, don't get a chance to try it very often, and it really is a lovely dram. It shows off some of those older flavors you find in older Bunnahabhains. It's not as old as some of the ones you find. It doesn't have them quite so much developed as you'll find if you find one which is 30 plus into the 40s, that sort of era. But this is 25 years old, so this is mid 1990s, and the distillery back at the time when this was being distilled was not open all the time. Just checking to make sure I have my dates right. No, it was in its period of production before it sort of shut down. So this is a period when it was owned by a different company. This is spirit that was made by people who aren't making it today. So this is sort of an older style of spirit using an older sort of production regime. And it sort of gives you a little bit of a chance to see how it was back in the day. It's not changed massively. You can definitely tell it's the same sort of like DNA that you find in the 18-year-old and earlier, but definitely different people. A different side of the distillery. But talking of different sides of the distillery, we said, segueing impeccably, our final whiskey, which we'd like to have a look at now, is something a little bit different. So if you want to grab this is, and I have been told that this is correct, so if I say this wrong, I apologise to all Gaelic speakers for me doing so. This is Toitiek Agar. And they used to do a whiskey called Toitiek, and it was smoky. And it was a limited edition, and it was popular. So they decided to do another one and make it part of the range. And so this one is now called Toitiek Agar, which means smoky number 2. So this is their sort of flagship smoky whiskey. They have lots of other ones. While Bunnahabhain, as I say, is best known for not making smoky whiskey, back pre-1960s, it was the style that everybody on Islay had to make because they were malting themselves, using their own facilities to make malted barley, and they couldn't get fuel other than peat. Islay is basically a lump of peat in the sea. So if you want to burn stuff to make heat and to dry your barley out, you use peat. And that's the reason why Islay is so famous for its peaty whiskies. But from the 1960s, Bunnahabhain, along with Bruichladdich, down on the other side of the island, moved over to using unpeated barley. I don't think it's a coincidence that they were both distilleries with a very easily accessible pier, so they could get the barley in from the mainland really easily. It didn't have to rely on their own maltings anymore. But behind the scenes, most of the distilleries in Scotland, maybe not most, a lot of distilleries in Scotland, even if they're not known for making peaty whiskey, make a little bit of peaty whiskey. While we talk about single malt whiskey being a big thing, is blended whiskey is what drives the whiskey market, and blenders want a little bit of smoke in their whiskey, and so all the distilleries put out a little bit of smoky whiskey so they have that flavor component they can drop into their blends. And Distell, the guys behind Bunnahabhain, they're also the guys behind Black Bottle, fantastic blended whiskey which used to be massively smoky, and because they couldn't get so much smoky whiskey, it became less smoky. But where do they get the whiskey from that's smoky? They'd have to buy it from another distillery. Why not make it at Bunnahabhain? It's on Islay. Everybody else on Islay uses smoky, makes smoky whiskey anyway. It's the perfect place to make a smoky whiskey. And so for years, it was all hidden behind the scenes, and you couldn't really see it. Didn't have their own whiskies, didn't have it in. It was just hidden away in blends and occasional independent bottlings. But now they really embrace this peaty side of their character, because they're making some really, really great smoky whiskies. And so Toisha Kagar is the main one that you will find in the range if you want to see what smoky Bunnahabhain is all about. So as I say, this is strangely a very modern style of Bunnahabhain. It's one they haven't been making for all that long in comparison to their unpeated version, but it's also a historical look at Bunnahabhain spirit. This is a lot closer to the sort of spirit they would have been making back in the 1960s and further back than that. So this very much is a different thing. The previous ones we've had are all about that sort of maritime character and the sherry cask. This one is maritime as well. It's got that brininess, but it's all about that medicinal smoke. And so, as Keith said, what causes the antiseptic TCP notes? Exactly as Andrew says, phenols. So phenolic compounds in peat. I'll try and do the quick way of this rather than getting into the vaguely sciencey. So peat itself is decaying plant matter, which decays and decays in an environment without oxygen. So basically, if a tree falls in a bog and it's covered with water, when it sort of rots and disappears and mulches down, it over time will create peat. It takes a long time. Peat is one of the stages on the way to coal. And so peat is like a baby version of coal without all the pressure that sort of creates coal. And so you cut out these lumps of earth, very, very sort of fibrous, sort of rich, dark earth. You leave it to dry, and then when you burn it, it will burn really, really well. And peat is one of these things that will burn until almost nothing is left, and it will burn hot and really well once you've got it started. It takes a while to get started. Once it's started, you're in trouble if you want to stop it. So the thing about peat is that it pumps out a lot of smoke, and that smoke is very phenolic. It has these phenols, these medicinal smoky compounds. If you've ever been to Islay and walked around in the winter, the smell coming out of everybody's chimneys is not coal smoke, it's peat smoke, because they still use peat to heat the houses on the fire in winter. Mostly they use central heating. Islay's fairly modern these days, but you still have people burning peat on their fires. And if you have a chance to, it's absolutely incredible smell as you walk around in Port Charlotte or in Bamore. It just has this sort of gentle sort of peaty smoke smell in the background. But that smoke, when you dry barley with it, sticks to the outside of the barley and then never goes away. And it's that antiseptic-y, TCP sort of smell is those phenol compounds from the peat sticking to the barley, and they're working their way through the whole of distillation and then maturation. You can control how TCP, how antiseptic it is, how smoky it is during your whole whiskey making process. There's little things you can tweak as you go along to make it more so or less so. It's all about choice and all about the flavors you want to create. So this one has got quite a lot of smoke going on. These days, this is peated to, I think, about 40 ppm. He says, checking his notes, peated to 40 ppm. And that is about as high as it gets on Islay. You get some guys going up to about 55, and you get Octomore, which is made by Bruichladdich. going up to 200 and 300. So that's stunt whiskey. That's not everyday whiskey. That's just whiskey specifically made so they can say, oh, look, we have the peatiest whiskey, aren't we? Great. And that's not me just making stuff up. That's very specifically why it exists. There's a lovely interview on our website with Jim McEwen from Bruichladdich, in which he specifically said people had a go at Bruichladdich for not making peaty whiskey, so he decided to make the peatiest whiskey ever just to show them. Bunnahabhain haven't done that. They just made peaty whiskey because they need the peaty whiskey. And since then, there's a lot of people who buy this peaty whiskey off them themselves. So if there's lots of smoky whiskies out there which are secretly behind the scenes, peated Bunnahabhain, but they don't put the name peated Bunnahabhain on the label. So, question from David. So is the 25 batch once a year or more randomly? I don't know exactly the batching schedule for the 25-year-old. I'm suspecting they do a new batch whenever they need one. That's the sort of standard way, just depending on how it's sold and how well it's doing. When they need some more of it, they'll start the process of selecting the cask, getting things ready. But so as and when it's needed, as far as I know. Excellent. So, question: is Smokehead peated Bunnahabhain? I don't know. Nobody seems to know what Smokehead is. I have heard many a theory, and I could not possibly pass on those theories. But pretty much, almost every distillery on Islay, at some point in time, someone's told me that it's Smokehead. So I think it could well be currently peated Bunnahabhain. I've got a bottle in the other room and I haven't tried it yet. So when I do, I think it could well be. It was allegedly Lagavulin for a while, but I think, I don't think that's the case anymore. But yeah, so sorry, I haven't even had a taste of this yet. On the nose, it has all that smoke, but for me, there's a certain type of smokiness that I really like. It's a very minerally smoke. Ardbeg has it a little bit. Lefroy has it in some of its expressions when it goes ashy. Kalila normally goes sweeter, but sometimes a little bit in there. It's like, for me, I was talking about gravel and gravel smoke, but which is not a thing because burning gravel is really difficult. So yeah, so that nice minerally sort of background to it. Even more on the palate, I get, for me, it's like eating a handful of gravel in a nice way, which is an interesting way of putting it. But yeah, so I get this sort of gravelly, stony flavour in there along with that smoke. And for me, that's what it's all about, is getting that sort of like smoky, stony flavour together. And that's something which really sort of points out Bunnahabhain to me. Because they make the spirit for themselves, they make other sort of variations on their spirit. I've asked them and nobody will tell me. Bunnahabhain, they say it's always say it's above their pay grade to tell me any secrets. But they make lots of different types of spirit, and this, their own spirit, is one of the best they actually make. Big, smoky, very different side of Bunnahabhain, but you can still get that Bunnahabhain sort of character running through it. You have that that sort of briny character. You have a bit of fruit in there as well. It's something that is definitely not Bunnahabhain, but is Bunnahabhain at the same time. And that's one of the things I love about the way that Bunnahabhain has developed more recently, is that we are now very much getting Bunnahabhain's sort of two sides, but there is a unified flavour in there. They're experimenting, showing new things, but very much, you can find almost anything you want from Bunnahabhain these days. Loads of different styles, loads of great whiskies. So that is our last dram of the night. I'm thoroughly enjoying this one, so I may have to sit here for a little while with it. Thank you very much for everybody for coming along. If you're in the Zoom room, I'm going to be hanging around for a little bit longer if you want to have a chat and talk about the wonders of whiskey and ask any questions. If you're on Facebook, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session today. We'll have loads more coming up soon. So we are in the process of organising our August sessions, and we've already got another couple another one for July, number 2. A couple more for July. The last week of July, we're doing, rather than doing a virtual tasting, we're having a Thursday night off so we can get a bit of rest, because our head buyer, Dawn Davis, is doing a 24-hour live stream along with the Blacktop brand ambassador, Mitch. They are going to be doing 24 hours of rum to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Blacktop Day, the final day that the Royal Navy gave out their rum ration. I will be sleeping on a blow-up mattress at the back behind the camera, looking after the technical side of things. But I definitely drew the short straw. But really cool things happening. But we've also already started organising our tastings for August and September. We're going to keep on doing these, making sure that we can get great drinks out there, and make sure we can enjoy it and get together, even if it is virtually, to enjoy some drinks. Anyway, yes. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.